You absolutely have to have a few moments in time where people can get together. There isn't anything that's going to replace like a little bit of in-person connection.
Hello and welcome to Office Libations Unwrapped. I'm your host, Claude Burns, and I'm here today with Sarah Lovelace, the VP of People at Airbase. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Claude. I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation and learning from you. But to start, we got to get to know you a little bit. So we're going to hit our quick hit segment.
Ooh.
So coffee or tea?
Ooh, both.
Ooh,
Both.
Okay.
Heavy on the coffee pre-noon. Post-noon, which we're recording this, it's at 12:13 p.m. PT. I have now switched to tea, and I'm really into a ginger tea at the moment. So
Can you hold that cup up a little bit more? Who's this?
Yeah, it's a yellow lab. This is Frank.
It's Frank. Is that your dog, Frank?
Yes.
No, Frank.
Yeah, he's the most handsome gentleman ever.
Yeah,
so Frank, we joining us today.
Excellent. I have a German Shepherd, so big dog guy. What's your go-to work snack?
Ooh, okay. Well, so this would have been different when I was physically going into an office every day. And when I was physically going in, office every day is going to sound like just really boring. And I understand that this is not a snack. I was a really big gum person when I was like physically in an office every day. And I actually had this realization a couple of weeks ago when I went to take a flight. I'm like, I haven't had any gum in like 4 years now. I'm very well aware that gum is not a snack, but it was something I was thinking about recently.
We sell lots of gum, so
Yeah,
I would disagree with you. Did you like spearmint, juicy fruit? Like, what was kind of?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's get specific about it. I like the dark blue Trident. I don't know what flavor that is, but dark blue Trident. And I preferred it when it was like the old school packaging, where it was like all the little pieces like stacked on top of each other. And then you did the wrapper. They were a little bit smaller, like pieces of gum. They were a little bit thicker, and I always felt like they were a little tiny bit stale. So they had a really nice sort of like bite to them.
You are a gum connoisseur. That's
impressive. I'm really not. It's just like they just try that. It was the gum that my grandparents always had, and my grandpa always had the cinnamon Trident. So it's more about like
the nostalgia behind it. Okay,
yeah.
You're retired. Money is no object. Where do you live?
Can I live in two places?
Yeah, money's no object. So
money's no object. I can live in two places. Okay, so I'm gonna do like mountain and beach. So my mountain place I would definitely live in Sun Valley, Idaho, like for sure, hands down. Absolutely stunning there. It's beautiful. Amazing skiing, amazing things to do in the summer. It's just like beautiful fresh mountain air. And then I think that I would also do something along like the beach, but not a like bright sunny beach. I would do like something along like the Northern California coast or like the coast of Ireland, or something like that where you have like the beach and the weather and it's cool and brisk. Go do that.
Okay. Last book you've read?
All right, so it's lowbrow, but I'm in a book club with some friends. We're very casual about it, and we use it mostly just to catch up. And sorry to my book club friends, but we just read the Love Boat series. I don't know if I would recommend it or not, but it was really fun, and it was a really good chance for all of us to get together.
I mean, anything with friends is usually up like 2-3 notches at least.
Yeah, anything with friends. Yeah.
Favorite historical figure, dead or alive?
Okay, well, I have to go with Ada Byron Lovelace. She was the grand dame of computer science. Lovelace, there's a little relation there, I'm sure, like down the line. And I just think it's really effing cool.
That's awesome. All right. So now we're going to get into a little bit of about employee experience, and specifically, like how does Airbase sort of think about creating that employee experience, sort of through the employee life cycle. So let's start with hiring. I know you guys have kind of a unique hiring process and sort of what you're looking for. Can you sort of talk to us a little bit about that initial candidate interview period and sort of how do you find the right people for your team?
Yeah. So, this one is interesting. I'll kind of rewind it a little bit as well. So, just as far as as my background goes, pre-joining Airbase, I had always been a part of. I think like a lot of people pre-pandemic, I had always been a part of very strong in-person, work cultures. I was an early employee of Bucks. I was there for about 7 years. Grew the team from 60 to post going public in 1200. And then I was part of a vertical farming indoor company called Plenty. We hired like 600 people in the course of like 3 years and had raised like $500 million. It's tech, but it's also like, very much like
Mhm.
you have to be there in person to do it. And I think so much about creating employee experience, at least when I came into this job at Airbase, to me, I really question, can you create a good employee experience even from like hiring and experience sort of like day to day if you're not actually physically sitting across from somebody and you can't see them and they can't read like tone and body language and Slack is the best form of communication said nobody ever, right? And so how do you sort of get that like magic and sparkle and so I was really hesitant about joining and thought like, can you be a VP of people and do that really well in a remote environment? And then how does that translate down into all the different functions? And I think the high level is like, yes, you can, but like there's definitely pros and cons to it. So as far as, then to answer the specific question, kind of around like the hiring side and how do you create really good experience? A lot of it is about creating, sort of like different touch points along the way with your candidates. You have to be, I think, in a remote environment where you have a less traditional, quote unquote, like on site interview sort of format. You have to be really clear with people, like what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what the process looks like and how they should think about the process, right? Like otherwise you feel like you end up like chopping together a bunch of random interviews and people feel like they interview for about like 5 years, right? Versus, maybe just like a couple of hours. So you have to be really clear and intentional about it. You have to communicate very actively upfront with candidates, and then you have to have a lot of like touch points along the way. And so for us, one of those touch points is for every candidate that we're interviewing and then make an offer to, we always do a values round where we go through our company values and, you know, basically to make sure that candidates know what they're signing up for because we're also clear about who we are and who we aren't, right? And if someone is wanting a lot of like water cooler talk and, to sit across, a desk from their boss, probably not going to be the best place for you because we're 300-person company. We're globally distributed. We're in 16 different countries. Like, we're not going to be able to meet what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I thought one of the things, in our pre-conversation that was unique was you guys have always been sort of globally
Yes.
distributed. You've always been a what we call now a remote first company.
Yes.
And so when people are looking for, what that experience is, like every company has an employee experience, whether it's
Yes.
remote, hybrid, in person, how your employees, how you interact with them is that experience. So can you kind of talk to me about, when you guys are hiring, like what makes that ideal remote employee or that ideal person to come to work for Airbase?
Yeah. So it's going to be, I will just say sort of like outside of like, the values and, a lot of the things that, you would maybe like look for in someone in a startup environment, right? Like, okay, like they're hardworking, they're detailed oriented, they're nice. That's one of our values, like be nice. But a lot of, I think for us, what we have found works really well for people to be hired in a remote environment is going to be people who are good at prioritization. They're really good communicators, and they have good internal boundaries. So on the prioritization piece and the internal boundaries piece, to me, those two really they go together. And what that means for us is like you're in 16 countries, and the majority of for us, we have about 50% of our team is based in India and works predominantly IST hours. About the other 50% of the company, while maybe not physically located in North America, does tend to support more North America based hours. And so, depending on like the time of year, our two core zones of working, it can be somewhere between 12 and a half or 13 and a half hours apart from each other. And it creates an environment where like you could feel like you're always on. And so you have to be able to like, again, prioritize things as they come in. Because you're always going to be getting a Slack, you're always going to be getting a notification, but you have to be able to prioritize and like know, okay, this is something that, is a really big deal and I probably need to adjust my schedule and work on, or this is something that can go ahead and wait. And I think that for, individuals who can help create some of those like boundaries for themselves, communicate it with their managers, get the support from their managers to do so, you have to be able to have that like that separation, but it's really, really, really hard to do. And obviously, it goes without saying, a lot of it comes from like your manager and like the top down.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you brought that up because I think as a lot of companies move to like kind of a hybrid, really, some people work better in the morning, some people work better in the
Yeah.
evening. It feels like work is all the time for some
Hmm.
people. And I think those boundaries that you just sort of talked about, can you kind of give some advice on like, how do you set those boundaries, as both as an employee and like as a manager so your team knows that, hey, it's okay if you don't answer my email at 5 p.m. because I know you're up at 6 a.m. supporting, we're on the
Yeah.
West Coast, like East Coast time. How do you guys, is that something that's documented? Is that something that is a conversation with the manager? Can you kind of just walk me through that?
Yep. So I will say it's a conversation with the manager and it's also always role specific, right? Let's say that you
Got to
have
support the customer.
what is for the customer, right? Like I think, if you're in a oh my gosh, and our support team is amazing. So if someone in support listens to this, it's an example, but our support team is phenomenal, right? Like, but let's say that your job is, on support and you decide, you know what, like the North American hour is just not gonna work for me. I'm gonna work in these like different hours. Okay, like, right, that's not gonna work. So it always starts with, okay, well, what's the business need and what's the objective? And it always has to, again, as you said, it has to start with supporting the customer. And then it really comes down to like communication with your manager. So I'll like give some examples of things that I do with my team. So I set like very clear guidance with everyone on my team, especially my directs. Actually, I will do it I feel like we probably do it about once a quarter, and it's more so like reminding so that I give them the space that they need. But I'll say, "Hey, here's generally like what my work schedule is like right now." I have two little kids. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. The mornings can get a little bit dicey. Then I always have this period, between like 5 and 8 p.m., where we're doing dinner, bath time, bedtime, and I don't want to miss that stuff. It's amazing, right? But that also means like, for me, that's something that I still have other responsibilities at work. So I always try and set with my team. Like I might have some off hours, right? Like I might need to catch up on some things. I'm not advocating this, but for everyone it's different. I might need to catch up on some things on the weekend. I might be doing like some pretty late emailing. Um, I don't expect you to respond to that. And I always tell them that. I also, every time they go on vacation, every single time, we always agree like upfront, hey, here's the things that are going on. I always say, how can I help support you while you're out? And then I set the expectation with them. I don't expect them to check their Slack. I don't expect them to check email as long as they have, properly delegated and communicated like work and tasks. But what I do say is if anything is urgent, I will text you or I will call you. And I think especially for the people on my team that report to me who are managers, like that's really important, right? Because there's just some institutional knowledge they have. There's things that they're going to want to weigh in on. And it also gives them the freedom to know they don't have to be checking Slack in this thing because they know the direct line that their manager will call them on. Never had to call anyone on vacation, like, ever. And I also set the same expectation with the weekends as well. But I think, again, sort of being clear about like my expectations with them, when I can work, when I can't work, and what that may or may not mean for them. But also, I think that path of escalation
Mhm.
and defining that is also really important.
Yeah, and I think that creates a, an employee experience where people feel that they can take time off and not get cut out of the
Mhm.
loop, right? Because people usually
Yeah,
take pride in their work and they want to be part of the process, and then to sort of
absolutely.
be like, sorry, we're not going to put you in for, the game winning play. It's like, no, I want to be there for that.
Exactly. And it also, like, I think what I have found is it's those communication paths outside of the normal communication channels, because also when you're on vacation, yes, you may take pride in your work, but like you also need some like time away and
Mhm.
reflection so you can be a better employee. You don't want to be checking your Slack or your email to see if like, your manager and like escalated something to you. So, that's where, having phones is amazing.
Yeah.
Great. And you have a different way that you can communicate with somebody.
Yeah, and I think that what I'm pulling out of this, it really comes down to trust, right?
Oh
It's like
yeah.
trusting your manager will take care of you.
Oh
Trusting
yes.
your employee will, sort of separate work from what they need to do personally, but also to make sure they're doing what needs to be done for the business. I think it comes
Exactly.
down to trust. So
Hmm.
now the question is, how do you build that trust and sustain that trust? Not just on the onboarding and someone's like excited, right? How do you do that continually at Airbase? Do you do any sort of, weekly meetings with teams? Do you bring the whole company together? What do you guys do to, sort of help build those trust bonds?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, a lot of the trust bond, like at the end of the day, I think you can do a lot at a company level, but a lot of the trust bonds, I mean, they practically come right between the employee and the manager and helping them, build connection. That being said, like we do help employees and managers um, build some of that cadence in as well. So we give them some tools. One of those tools is something called like 15-5, similar to like a lattice, right? A lot of like performance engagement, but there's a couple things that it does. Like the first is it allows employees to go in every week and just put in 1 through 5. How are you feeling this week? And it can be work related, it can be non-work related. But what that does is it allows everyone a point of reflection every week. And it allows the manager, to sort of like see what the employee has going on. We also, I don't want to use the word dictate, but like strongly encourage one-on-ones every single week, between managers and employees. Cause I think sometimes so often like with trust, it just comes down to like lack of communication. Either the manager doesn't know what the employee is working on, the employee isn't clear of the manager's expectations. So it's really about helping, managers and employees connect on a very, very frequent basis to make sure that they're both clear on expectations. I know that's an obvious, but sometimes I think it gets missed. Um, and then, the last thing, I mean, ultimately, it also just comes down to like company results as well. um, I don't care what role you're in the organization, there is something results oriented that absolutely every single person can measure, whether you're doing it on a big scale or a small scale. And so, sort of like, pulse checking, those types of things, whether around delivering revenue, delivering quality of code, delivering, sort of like a certain number of signed like quality offers. A lot of, I think, trust just comes over time when you start to see like a lot of those results stack up.
No, that totally makes sense. You kind of mentioned sort of, collecting a little bit of data to sort of see how the organization is doing. What sort
Mhm.
of data do you use to sort of see how the organization health is, whether from a employee experience, happiness, retention? What are you looking at? I think you guys did some interesting stuff on compensation recently. Um,
Mhm.
what do you guys look at?
Ooh, I
Now
love
you're
this.
excited, right?
I love this. I love this question. I think that, like, overall, like, organizational health, right, you can measure it in a like, you can measure it in a lot of
Mhm.
different ways. And so for us, we do it in a few ways. So the first is, obviously, first and foremost, we look at attrition. We also look at attrition type by tenure, location, role, department. And I think the reason that we try and break it down, so granularly is that every all departments have their own sort of, rhythm, right? Generally, you see sales organizations, there's a higher rate of turnover. Sometimes engineering, you see sort of like longer tenure, but that can also depend on country. Um, and so we definitely will look at, organizational health through retention. Um, but we also look at like regrettable and non-regrettable attrition as well. I think in having some conversation with like a few other people leaders recently, one leader was telling me, "Oh, we haven't had any attrition, in the last year." And I was like, "Ooh, like that's
Yeah.
not great." Like, I think I always I don't know if it sounds like a little like woo-woo or not, but
Mm.
like to me, I always know that an organization is doing really well, like when you can see it breathing. And part of like seeing it breathing and like seeing it move is sort of like the ebb and flow of, of coming in and out. And again, I know it's like a little bit woo-woo, but like I always like to see like an organization sort of breathe.
Mhm.
So that's one way that we look at organizational health. We also will look at organizational health through engagement surveys. And we try not to do them very often because sometimes I think that, not a whole lot changes. But also, I think you have to be like realistic about where you are as an organization as well. Like, if you're a 300-person, startup organization, you may not be able to take action on a bunch of things in an engagement survey that even sort of like, warrant employees, giving a lot of, time to it. And so whenever we do look at engagement, we also will look at engagement again by like all the different, breakdowns in terms of cost centers and departments and teams and location and age and tenure. But then we also will overlay it with employee demographic information to help give some context. So like an example of something like that, we had there was like one part of our organization like some very specific questions about what's my career growth? Like, what's my long term path? And by overlaying, tenure, department, location into it, like the answers became very clear and not scary because it was a part of the organization where the average tenure was well over 3 years actually at that
Mhm.
point. And when you looked at the data, it was mostly coming, from people who were starting to even get like closer to the 4 year mark. Um, and those are very, very reasonable things, for employees with that tenure to be asking. I don't know. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how organizations use data, around sort of people management or, I think it's
Mhm.
really interesting because it's kind of
Mhm.
this art and science, right?
Yes.
Because it's really hard to put a number on a person, right? You can put number on output or like
Yeah.
activities, but there's so many things that people bring that can't be measured a lot of times. And
Right.
there's also, I think, the point you just brought up. It's like everyone's getting to this point where there may not be a path in your organization that they can really get promoted to or advance. So maybe there needs to be a different path for them. And if
Yeah.
you start to identify that, you can either, help them realize that you kind of need to go somewhere else, right? You got to find another
Yeah.
job or hear different opportunities within the organization so you don't lose your good people that have all those intangibles, all those core values that you really want to represent your company. But there's just unfortunately, because of the needs of the business, not growth for them where they're currently at.
Yeah.
And that trust and that communication is paramount to having that conversation to say, hey, I need you to step back, maybe even little, maybe if even it's a cut and pay to have the opportunities, further down the line.
Yeah. And I think like that piece of it, like around, sort of, growth. I think back to some other companies I've worked for and, and sometimes it was like, it's like you brought someone in, like you had to make it work as like a people organization, right? It's like had to find that path and and I think yes, like the organization, like if you're gonna hire really good people, they want to grow, like they're ambitious, like you have to help open the doors for them. But I also think that as an organization, you don't have to be all things to everybody. And I think sometimes where organizations get into a trap with their people and where that that trust and that communication and that like goodwill can kind of like break down is when you're also not honest with employees, right? Like, I mean, like you said, you might get to a point where maybe the employee is ready for the next thing, but the business need isn't there. Or maybe you're adjusting and changing your hiring strategy and you may not have a promotion path for for a few years, and like that's okay. Like you try and limit that as much as possible, but you also as an organization you cannot cannot be all things to everybody. And I think when you're really clear about that with yourself and your employees, much less frictionless process overall and a lot less like contention and like angst and anxiety.
For sure. And I think comes back to your point on just good communication across the
Mhm.
organization. So I want to switch gears a little bit because I think you kind of have a unique perspective having sort of worked in a very in-person sort of culture building and now in a very sort of remote centric culture building role. What are the sort of advantages and disadvantages to both?
I think that definitely like, the pros on the culture building to the remote side of the world is that you have to be very specific and intentional about it. You have to spend so much more time on Zoom. You have to spend a lot more time and I think it's harder for some people to do than others, but you have to spend, time beginning of a meeting, doing a little bit of rapport building, getting to know people, on a personal level, because those things aren't going to naturally happen, sort of on like the moments in between, where you're going to get, a snack, like some Trident gum or, a cup of ginger tea or, something like that. So you have to be really intentional about it. And you also have to, set out time for it. And honestly, like, I think the cons of it overall, like, again, you're never going to be able to fully recreate an in-person work environment. And that's also okay. I think the thing that's made it really successful at Airbase, we know that there's pros and cons. We're also clear about who we are and who we aren't. And we know that that's not going to work for remote doesn't work for everybody all the time. And that's also okay too. But I just think you have to be really clear about like what you're signing up for. And know that like there's going to be some trade-offs, but again, we think that at least for the employees who are here, and I can say for myself, the pros definitely outweigh the cons.
Makes sense. If you were to give kind of like one sort of like, you have to do this if you're building a remote team, remote culture, what would it be?
You absolutely have to have a few moments in time where people can get together. There isn't anything that's going to replace like a little bit of in-person connection. So whether it's you decide like once a year you're going to do a full company retreat. Or maybe you're going to do some very light, sort of like geographical, like something in person, very, very once in a while. I think that's a really important thing to do. Clearly separating out time for managers and employees to get to know each other. Um, Also adding a little bit of like fun and sparkle into your all hands Zoom meetings, I think is really, really important. Get some fun music going, but then I think the last thing is, very clearly write down and articulate your values. And again, be really clear about what you can offer and what you can't offer. Like most of the time, I think, again, companies, employees, like you kind of end up missing the mark when you think it's something else and it's not what you thought you were signing up for.
Yeah, that's very true. I think I have this theory. I'm curious to get
Mhm.
your take on it.
Well,
That
yeah, I love a
yeah,
theory.
oh, theory. It's a theory.
Mhm.
For remote companies, I think one of the most important things, and I think you're going to agree with me, so I'm just going to put it out there right
Ooh,
now.
bold
Um,
statement.
I know, I know, I know. Well, you've said a couple things that make me comfortable feeling sharing
Okay,
this theory with
great,
you.
great. And you like
Um,
said no.
is that remote companies need to be even more intentional about what they're looking for and who they are during their hiring process compared to a traditional in office or traditional sort of company, because you can kind of adjust that person, behaviors, and these people kind of conform to norms a little bit more naturally in person. Are you a t-shirt office, a suit office? Like, people kind of get that vibe and sort of assimilate a little bit. Whereas if you're remote, you don't have as many of those sort of subtle sort of things to get everybody on the same page.
You don't. So, yes, I would agree with that.
I'm going to
And,
take that as a win.
yeah, take it as one. No, I definitely agree with that. And again, part of how we do that at Airbase is every single person who interviews at the company, they read our company values beforehand. They do a values round. Because again, like we're a 7-year-old company, we're a first grader at this
Yeah.
point. A lot of our behaviors are they're already, kind of in some sort of a rhythm. But I think also you should have to like it helps to sort of build that trust with people because again, like 90% of the time, like you don't know what your employees are doing every day. And like you don't need to. As long as they know what they're signing up for and the kind of environment and what's expected.
And so another thing I like to get your opinion or feedback on is sort of the trends and things that have changed from sort of pre-COVID to now in sort of hiring and employee experience, and just generally the employee experience for companies. Have you noticed any changes?
I think that just in general, there's a lot less emphasis, and this I would say I'll answer it kind of like ununiquely to Airbase, but there's a lot less emphasis on all of this like in office perks. I think that from my experience, right in like the 2010 there was I felt like this like sort of like rat race, like who can have the coolest office, like, make sure when the person comes in, you're showing them, at Box, we had a slide, from first sliding back and forth, like make sure it's on the slide, like the kitchen, the cafeteria, like is there a laundry service pickup that comes, is there a pool table in the office, right? And I think that anything, I think that what my it was my opinion, but I think if anything, like what a lot of, COVID, but then really sort of the transformation to like remote work, taught us is that like work doesn't need to be all of those different things. It doesn't have to create and sort of like fill this entire void in your life where, you can find all of your social things to do at work. They're going to take care of absolutely everything for you. You're going to have, an office with a slide in it, which was really effing cool at the time. Right?
Your
Like you
kids
don't
would probably love the slide, though.
they would. The slide did get a little dangerous at one point, and it did
I have
sort of
no
get
doubt.
it got the caution tape on it, but, like, we got a lot of years out of that thing, and it
Yeah.
was really, really, really fun, but I think that also, what maybe more people are looking for, and maybe this is, just me in my late 30s now, I feel like people wanna go to work, they wanna do something meaningful where they feel appreciated, but at the end of the day, it's also work, and they wanna make sure that they're taking care of themselves outside of work and, and having lives that aren't just fully centered along, the workplace. And that's one thing I've seen change. It's something I've seen dramatically change for myself. Could also be the introduction of having kids too. That definitely helps. But I think, work can be work and can be absolutely amazing. And I love what I do, but it doesn't also need to be the place where I go and play, cool and go down a slide either. And that's okay.
Makes sense. Appreciate you sharing. I got one more question for you. So I got to make it a good one.
Okay.
Yeah, I got to make it a good one. Um, so when you think of what yeah, let me rephrase this.
Mhm.
All right, when you think of like what you're building at Airbase and this multinational sort of thing, how do you really try to get everybody aligned with all the different cultural differences and sort of people differences, not just sort of the logistical challenges of communicating across time zones, but how do you get people who are probably very, very different all to work together on the same page?
Yeah, I think that I will say this, like, this sort of like getting people aligned and on the same page and sort of understanding this is something that is true for a global company. And this is something that's also true of, people who, are coming into the same office every day. Like the examples that I give, and this is kind of answering your question, but I will answer it at some point. But, I think that like, when you get to a certain size, let's just call it 100 people, even if you had sales and engineering sitting right next to each other, like sales would still say engineering doesn't understand my problems, and engineering says like sales doesn't know how to sell my things, right? Like, and so I think that there are just certain things like that exist, and then sometimes in a global workforce, they just get really heightened. And one of the things that at least we have done at Airbase, and try to be successful around that is a lot of communication and over communication. So, we have a weekly all hands. We have this sort of, cadence and schedule where we make sure we're sharing our company priorities, why we're doing them, right? Employees have to hear things. Actually, everybody has to hear things at least 10 times before it sinks in. So we always try and do that. But then we also, again, one of our values is be nice. And Slack is not the best form of communication. And we always encourage people, if you have to have like a big discussion, or you don't feel like you're getting anywhere on Slack, don't just keep sending the Slack messages. Get get on a Zoom, get on a phone call, and and see someone. And then I always give people this example. When I first started, it was the first time I was managing a team outside of the US. And, one person on my team, Maggie, I've told her this story many a time, but I think it was like my first week, or I maybe hadn't even like started yet, like officially. And I sent her a Slack message and it was like something about like meeting. And she replied, and she's based in India, and she replied, sure. I was like, sure. There's no period. There's no exclamation part. Where's the smiley face? And I get on the meeting with her, and I'm so nervous. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I have this employee like who I've heard amazing things about. She already hates me. Like, oh my God, this is gonna be really awful. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to win her over. And I get on and everything's fine.
Mhm.
And then I had a conversation with her later, and I realized for her, sure, is my version of okay, smiley face.
Yeah.
And so part of setting people up to have a lot of those, like sort of those like cultural differences, we talk about it a lot, right? Oh, hey, when you said this, like that's that. Oh, I get that. Oh, that's a colloquialism, like where you are, this is where it is for me. So we really encourage a lot of that, like open dialogue and open communication. We are going to be doing some trainings. I think, everybody could just use a little bit, more understanding. We also do like these country celebrations where every quarter, people from around the globe talk about and share and celebrate, different holiday that they have. But it's like hard, but a lot of it is exasperated through Slack.
Yes. Text communication is not the best way to get everyone on the same page.
Terrible. It's really terrible. Yeah.
Sarah, I want to thank you today for joining me. And I see more and more of our clients using Airbase every day.
Right. I
That
love
that is actually
that.
that is not a paid
Excellent.
plug. That is actually a fact.
No,
Um,
excellent.
yeah, I saved
Okay.
that to the end, so you didn't know anything about it. But yeah, more and
I
more
d I
people get
didn't.
Airbase. Yep.
I didn't even say yes to this knowing that. All right, I'm gonna take that as a win. I'm gonna put that in our Aries love channel.
Yeah, but it's true. So you guys must be doing something great, but really appreciate your thoughts on sort of building that remote first team and sort of what you're doing and sharing just your general experience with me today. So
Yeah,
thanks again.
yeah, thanks so much. This is fun.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Sarah Lovelace on Office Libations Unwrapped. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for future episodes with inspiration, ideas, and strategies to optimize your workplace culture. And remember, happy employees make happy customers. Until next time, I'm your host, Claude Burns.